2020 Sigma 1 class. As Leroy said, we're going to be finishing up Mars Pluto through the 8 phases, and today we're going to be looking at Mars Pluto in Balsamic phase. First of all, however, hold on, let me get a good old housekeeping slide. If you want to look at anything, most of you are probably familiar with many of these hyperlinks that you see, so we'll just skip forward and I'll repeat what Leroy said for this recording. We are putting our course materials on sale the end of this year, and all of you have segment 1, but we have been in process of combining segment 2 and segment 3 together. So segment 1, the basics, segment 2, everything else. And yes, I am working on putting everything for the health and wellness part into one PDF, and hopefully I will have that done through the beginning of next year. Universe keeps throwing me curveballs in regards to family. It was exactly 1 month ago today, as we were doing last quarter phase, that my elderly father took a fall and did not survive. And so I ended up getting done with class and immediately rushing off to the emergency room with my mom and 2 sisters. And Dad didn't come out of it. It was a head injury. And so it's a little sensitive right now because it was the 3rd family member in 4 months that has transitioned. We have Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all in that first house now. Jupiter went into the first house mid-November, I think it was, like a week before my father passed. So anyway, moving along. Balsamic phase here. I've been really connecting in with these last 90 degrees of the cycle of phases and aspects. So I'm going to go through the basic material here rather fast because this is the 8th time we are looking at it. If you're not aware of this first started showing up in Dane Rudier's book, The Lunation Cycle. Jeffrey expanded upon it, and I expanded on it a little bit more, but it is essentially what Dane Rudier put out back in the 1980s. And I've really watched over the last 30 years or so a lot of different astrological methodologies, and astrologers really start working with the cycle of 0 to 360. And I was just blessed to have found it way at the beginning of my studies. And so I don't know how to do aspects without it. I love it. It just really, it's that glue that helps us with the interpretation and putting it all together. Here's a listing of you of each of these 45-degree phases that you can use as a reference point if you prefer it that way. And of course, what this explains to us is that life, or our souls, are always in that state of continuous change and evolution. 0 to 360 is a complete cycle from birth, growth, bloom, decay, and death to restart all over again. And of course, every planet or point in space is in a phasal relationship to every other planet and point in space. There may or may not be an aspect between them. And so as you are starting to learn interpretation with charts, you start with the phase between any 2 planets, and that'll give you that foundation. And then if there's an aspect that fills in details from the phase. Here is the slide that we use on determining aspects, faster moving planet compared to the slower in a counterclockwise fashion. If, 4 or 5 years ago, I switched to compare the to compare the sun to the outer planets. This is coming from doing 30 plus years of forecasting and recognizing that we really do look at things from our geocentric or Earth perspective. And then I had heard this first from Laura Nalbandian. If you guys are not familiar with this, when Jeffrey first started teaching astrology, Jeffrey Green, um, he found a bookstore in Seattle called Astrology et al., and it was run by Maggie and, oh, I'm forgetting her husband's name. I used to know him too. I think it was Greek. Anyway, they had a bookstore, Astrology et al., and Laura and her brother, whose name is also escaping me right now, uh, they were young, impressionable teenagers. And so Laura grew up taking classes from Jeff, and she was the first one that I kind of heard this from, and I've switched over to adopt it. So if you're beginnings to astrology, my 2014 webinars still have everything compared to the sun, Jeffrey's original teachings. This is one of the few areas where I have differed from his original teachings. And of course, when I ran a school for 6 years, sometimes he would say, compare the planets to the nodes. Other times he would say, compare the nodes to the planets. So there was an astrologer who is deceased now. She went through his old message board up to that point, and 70% of the time he would say, start with the planet, go in a clockwise motion to the nodes. And that's what we then adopted as the way of finding the aspects that the nodes make to the planets. Of course, with Pluto, the soul, we have what we call 4 types of evolution. 2 are non-cataclysmic. You can see these on the screen. Non-cataclysmic is that step by step, day by day, year by year evolution that we all do in these physical bodies. And of course, then there are the 2 cataclysmic kind. I've been going through one of these, which is the death of 3 close family members in 4 months. 1 was COVID, 2 were accidents. And of course, we can also have internal or external crises to various degrees that are something we initiate. And they build up to a point of pressure where we make a change. And of course, I feel that the cataclysmic, non-cataclysmic, all 4 possibilities can be combined in all kinds of various ways. I've just had this cataclysmic situation with death, and it really has me doing a lot of non-cataclysmic thinking and pondering and evolving and looking at those 3 major planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, beginning a brand new circle together in various ways over the ascendant of my chart at 21.5 Capricorn. So you can combine them in all kinds of ways. There's 3 reactions to the evolutionary impulse: to totally go for it, rare; to be totally resistant, rare. Most common is the 3rd reaction, which is being willing to change in some ways and yet resisting change in other ways due to the fear of the unknown, that future, and of course, whatever security patterns we have built up within our soul and our ego. Now, Mars, Pluto in evolutionary astrology studies have primary lifetimes together. And this, of course, if you read Jeffrey Green's books on Pluto, if you participate in the message board, his writings were kind of all over the place. And here again, when I ran a school for 6 years, myself and a couple of other evolutionary astrologers in what we call that 2nd generation really kind of started to review and put things together in a more Virgo-like fashion to Jeffrey's Piscean paradigm. And so when Pluto is in a specific natal house, we look at there being anywhere from 8 to 9 primary lifetimes in which the soul is born with Pluto in that house, various signs, of course, and learning those lessons, and then learning the Pluto polarity point lessons. These primary lifetimes are always a 45-degree aspect of Mars and Pluto. I personally will use 3 degrees applying, 5 degrees separating. You can use the same orbs, you can use a little bit less. Not really so much wider than 5 degrees, really. But in between that, there can be all kinds of secondary lifetimes working through the same Pluto house lessons. In other words, soul has as much free choice to take as long or go as fast as it desires. And so here's the example of those primary lifetimes in which here's the 45-degree angles, same as that generic cycle of phases and aspects, all right? The secondary ones, Mars, Pluto can be 30 degrees, 120-degree waxing or waning trine. It can have no aspect and just be in a specific phasal relationship. Now, brings up this question. Do we go through lifetimes with consecutive Mars-Pluto phasal relationship order via a specific Pluto house? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. My theory is most likely we do not. We can bounce over from life to life having Pluto in various houses. However, our multifaceted soul does end up living a primary lifetime in each of those 8 primary aspects of Mars, Pluto in a specific house. And we do that through all 12 houses. And it's a good possibility we could even do it more than once. As Jeffrey Green's teachings would say, if we knew how many lifetimes we had lived, we'd all be depressed. There's a reason why we have an unconsciousness. And it takes a very evolved soul to be able to hold our past lives, let alone all of our past lives, in consciousness and not go crazy. So here we go. With Mars, Pluto specifically, Pluto always becomes the 0 point wherever it is in the chart. And we go in that counterclockwise fashion to Mars. And you can see how we put those 8 phases between Mars and Pluto together. And today we are specifically going to be looking at the balsamic phase. And as you can see, I'll back up one more time here. These 8 phases are divided between yang, yin, yang, yin. Yang energy moving outward from the center, yin energy moving back towards the center. As we can see, balsamic phase from 315 to 360 is yin, so the energy is returning to the center. And of course, that key word is spirit and ideals, bringing that entire cycle, and specifically with Mars, Pluto, a cycle of our desired nature relative to the natal Pluto house. We're bringing it to a completion from everything that began at the new phase conjunction of Mars to Pluto in any specific house. And so as we bring this desired nature to a complete cycle and conclusion, what will follow is a brand new cycle of our desired nature developing relative to Mars, Pluto, in an entirely different natal house with the 12 archetypes. And so as we enter these last 45 degrees of the balsamic phase, all of our unfinished or incomplete business relative to these desires, all the old patterns, stages of development, etc., anything that's unfinished, will be recreated to bring whatever is necessary to a culmination with regards to the desires that were initiated at new phase. One more time, specific to that natal Pluto house. In the balsamic phase, the consciousness of our soul now begins the process of culminating the mutation of desires within itself that started at the last quarter phase. And that last quarter phase at 270 to 315, the last 90 degrees of 0 to 360, what is initiated here is basically bringing things to completion, but bringing things to more and more consciousness relative to our connection to universal source or universal reality as it is expressed here. And so, in other words, just like that first 90 degrees, there was so much energy to break free and manifest. The last 90 degrees becomes much more been there, done that. What else? And it has us again really starting to yearn to know those larger answers and larger questions relative to any two planets. We, in this series of classes, are looking at it relative to the desire nature within our soul. Our own soul on an unconscious level makes its desires specific, or excuse me, conscious, specifically via Mars. And yet both Mars and Pluto from last quarter and now in balsamic phase are having to surrender to source, surrender to source, surrender to source. And this is, again, contrast with that first 90 degrees. So consciousness within the soul relative to its desire nature is becoming highly internalized and self-contemplative. We're still having to be out there in the world, but we're also very internalized and reflecting and considering things from that inner level as much as the outer manifestation of anything. And so as we're finishing up in balsamic phase with Mars Pluto, we are considering the nature of the universe and universal reality, source, God, Goddess, Great Spirit, whatever your language is, as I like to say. We're considering what's it all mean, and we're doing it through the filter of our own soul's personal desire nature and what is yet unmanifested or unresolved relative to our desire natures. And so our own desires are having to realign and co-create with universal desire. And so we're still the spark of our own individualized self, our own soul, our own ego. But here we're really looking at ego aligning with soul and individual soul aligning with universal soul. And the avenue that we're specifically doing it through is our own Mars-Pluto relationship. And so as we are our own unique self, there is this continual fine-tuning in this phase of aligning our will with divine will, our desires with divine desire. So we'll look at this specific with an example today, but whatever those 12 houses of Pluto are that it can reside in, all of those 12 archetypes of desire nature are going to be contemplating what does this mean from the perspective of source as best as we understand it and perceive it. Now, whatever phase we find our Pluto house in, there's always an opposite one. Just like we have the 12 archetypes with the 6 polarities, we have the 8 phases with 4 polarities and all the way around the circle. So the opposite of balsamic phase is gibbous phase. And so Mars Pluto in balsamic phase doesn't get a retreat to the mountaintop or the ashram. We still have to be in that world. Gibbous phase, relating and synchronizing with so many words to the Virgo archetype, like balsamic relates to the Pisces archetype. It's more than that. We have to still manifest what is left of our desire nature out there in the world. there are still desires to manifest. There's still something to be actualized and realized in our desire nature. And as we become more and more aware of everything from a broader universal perspective, then how do we manifest that? How do we have one foot in the non-physical world and another foot in the physical world in regards to our entire desire nature? So, as we then work through the specifics of the aspects within this phase, we have the balsamic semi-square. This is where Mars is past 315 degrees relative to its relationship with Pluto. And when it's 315, 16, 17, 18, and it's just a few degrees past, it's still a crisis. It's still an evolutionary gate, as we call it in EA. In other words, as I always say, our semi-squares and our sesqui-squadrates are squares and a half. They are just as tension-filled as a regular square or an opposition or a conjunction. And I personally feel that it's just this disservice to astrology to work with dividing the circle by 4, but we entirely forget to divide the circle by 8. And so we're just past this evolutionary gate and starting to work with a whole new energy. In other words, we've moved from energy moving outward of last quarter to now energy moving inward of balsamic. And what we are bringing about here at this balsamic semi-square is speeding up the mutation between everything that constitutes the past of our desire nature and everything that constitutes the future of our desired nature. And we will go through this on a very personal level, and we will go through it on a cultural level, regardless to wherever we are on planet Earth in space and time in the current life. Now, keep in mind that everything that constitutes the past up until this point with this aspect, we know it represents that security, but it also represents been there, done that. What else? Everything that represents the future for the next 15 degrees and beyond is unknown because we haven't quite experienced it yet. So it creates the crises is a push-pull kind of going back and forth between past and future. The past shows up because there is a desire that we didn't quite learn or manifest or understand or accumulate, express, all those good words. And then that interacts with what is next, that tug and the pull of the future, which we all have. And we have this tug between past and future 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have it between any two planetary pairs. We have it just living life. But here we're looking at it specific to Mars, Pluto. And when we're looking at it through Mars, Pluto, it becomes very direct to our own soul by sign, generation, by house, one of the 12 archetypes, by Mars, by their aspects together. And so if you see Mars, Pluto in, past the 350 semi-square, you really want to take it as important and dynamic and strong as one of the 4 squares, or even the opposition between Mars and Pluto. And so again, I was going to say this in another way from what I was just speaking last slide. This crisis at this evolutionary gate is that, one more time, conflict or collision of desires. The need to fulfill social duties and obligations, that is that pull of the past that is taking our desires that are yet unfinished and putting them in our world some way and saying, you've got to walk through this. You can't go A to Z. You have got to go X, Y, Z. So that's almost that gibbous phase polarity that says, what is it you've yet to complete? How do you have to be in the world? And this collides with then balsamic phase, yin phase, wanting to withdraw from the world or whatever our obligations are and really start to ponder what is yet within us that wants to come through in a new way, those new sparks. Just like 0 to 90 is the pressure to leave the past behind and really manifest the new, all right? 270 to 360 is the pressure to complete. And yet the closer we get to 360, the more 0 and beyond rebirthing starts to show up, filling in the void or space. So throughout this phase, and specifically with this aspect then, you've got to be able to go back and forth and follow that tug within our desire nature to finish up, to fulfill, to address, to look at. But then you also have to follow that desire nature, but it intuitively says, go within and ponder, and sometimes even go within and experiment something relative to your desire nature in an entirely new way. So when we get that tug to go within, all right, one more time, this is allowing then the energy or space for the new seed thoughts or impulses to come into further consciousness in regards to our desires. And when we honor that, though, it can create various levels of conflict or even confusion, because it can tug us back into that past to be secure. And as many of us discover in our studies of natural law and utilizing that through study of evolutionary astrology, it's a lot easier to project the past forward and go back into security rather than leave it behind and step into the unknown. So if we have a tendency to be just a little too much pulling into the past, and so let me just clarify here. So when we feel that tug to withdrawal to allow the new to come in, we sometimes will also withdraw though and just settle for that security of the past. If we get too caught up in that, it will create confusion. It will create disintegration. It will create that, the famous Piscean words, disillusion, things literally just dissolving and disintegrating in front of us. And it kind of then forces us, okay, to look at things in new ways. And what will have a tendency to happen is somehow, some way, we'll draw in people, places, situations, will draw in some type of socializing that will draw us out of that past, that will draw us out of that security, that will spark the new desires that are within us and needing to be brought to the surface. And what happens then as we move along here, another 5 degrees, we're going to hit the harmonics of 9, dividing the circle of 360 by 9. And when you divide it by 9, a lot of those nouvelles, they're they'll hit with the trines. They're in there. We don't always look at each one of those 9 40-degree aspects. You can if you want to. But here in Balsamic phase, this is a real strong gestation aspect between Mars and Pluto. This is where we've moved into the Balsamic phase relative to our desires, and Mars is sparking all over the place to Pluto of new thoughts, new perceptions, new revelations, all of this new desire energy, the new cycle that's coming within our soul. And if you want to, I think this was in the email that was sent out. There is an EAN graduate, Sean Limbaugh. She sent me an email of her own little I can't remember, cycle of phases and aspects determinator. If you might want to go back to that email in your inbox, and she provides a link where you can study and play with these aspects. You can also find this through Solar Fire software as well. You draw up a chart, you go to, can't remember what, the right-hand side, you look for the difference listing. It would behoove all of you in your astrological studies, especially working with clients, to really kind of create this difference listing between any 2 planets and just go through that and see what pops out for you, so that you can notice if any 2 planets are in a balsamic novel aspect to each other. It can really deepen your interpretations with a client. It doesn't mean you'll have to go through everything with every planet, but based upon, if you're a practicing astrologer, based upon what the client presents to you as what they would like to work with, that will spark your own thought processes with astrological archetypes that will then have you go look for any 2 specific planets and their phasal or aspects with each other, and you can tune in between all of the many planets and their relationships with each other from time to time, a specific that can really be thought-provoking and helpful to a client on their journey. So here again, specific with Mars and Pluto relative to this, this is a very, very strong gestation process for laying seed thoughts with new desires. Now, what happens, okay, is we'll have 2 reactions with Mars, Pluto in this in this specific aspect. One reaction is again, the soul wants to go for it. It wants to move forward, and there can be some degree of frustration because in addition to moving forward, we still have 40 more degrees to go between Mars and Pluto in completing any karmic obligations of our desires. Push pull, push pull, push pull. The other reaction is we can become confused. We're not ready to move forward. Again, we want to go back to that comfort of the past that we were looking at 315-degree aspect. And what's happening is those new seed thoughts, they're threatening our security. They're threatening what we have created up to this point in regards to our desire nature. And it, is threatening to just disable the whole works. And so there has to almost be a little bit forward, a little bit back, a little bit forward, a little bit back. All right. There will also be the consideration of the way we react can be based upon the cumulative effects of actions taken in this and past lives. Let's just give an example of this. If we have Pluto in one of the yin houses, second, fourth, sixth, etc., we can have a tendency to feel more threatened. If we have Pluto in one of the yang houses, first, third, fifth, etc., we might be a little more willing to move forward and be pushed or tugged back. So, as you know, with astrology, nothing is one size fits all, and everything kind of works simultaneously with everything else. And therein lies all that intuition that we develop as we look at chart after chart after chart. The next aspect that we look at is the balsamic semi-sextile, the 330 degrees. And what happens here is the new cycle of desires are beginning to come forth in stronger and stronger awareness. We're really getting conceptions of, oh, this is what I want to do next. I mean, just think about the process of how you're finishing up some project in your life and you're looking at the next one. What pops in is my nephew, who is very creative and has his 8-to-5 job. However, he does woodworking on the side, and he does beautiful woodworking. And he just finished making himself an entire bed frame, a king size bed out of wood. It's just gorgeous. It's just beautiful. And he says, Kim, I'm finishing it up. And all the time I'm finishing it up. And he's a 6th house Pluto. So he's those little details. He goes, all the time I'm finishing up this little thing and that little thing. He says, I have my next 3 woodworking ideas are in front of me, and I'm trying to figure out which one is the strongest and I'm going to do next. So simple example of how this 330 energy can be working for you. And so as we are going through the completion of the existing desire nature, we will be continuing to align it with whatever we consider to be more timeless values and beliefs relative to the culture we are born into. In other words, we will be going beyond the consensus of our current culture. And as we are trying to fulfill the remaining desires within us, we can look different. And society can just think we're strange, not really understand, why are you doing that? I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. And yet we within ourselves are saying, I have to finish this. And at the same time, I have to start laying the foundations for what will come next. And so we have to finish whatever that Pluto house desire nature is and speaking to us. At the same time, again, we put a little energy into whatever is pulling us forward. We put a little energy into whatever is pulling us forward. And we have to, with the cardinal quadrant, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Balsamic phase, it's 1 step forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 1 step back. And as we're doing it, we're still slowly moving towards that 360. And so that entire cycle that started at the new phase is starting to come to completion. It won't be completed until 360. We can have planet Mars Pluto at 330, and there can still be 1 or 2 more lifetimes of that natal Pluto house, or more if we want to be in resistance. But everything relative to that natal Pluto house with Mars now is starting to dissolve. Leroy, somebody is just pulling into the driveway, honey. You want to come up and get the doorbell while I keep working? Will you do something quickly, Leroy? Would you please unmute our volunteer? Do I have the volunteer? Oh, sorry about this, everyone. Are you there, Leroy? All right, volunteer.
This is David. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can. Hello, honey. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey.
All right. Well, this is we got some house repairs going on, so I'm going to have to let Leroy go do his thing, but you and I will carry forth.
Sounds
And
good.
so,
I'll just mute myself if you ask me a question. Or
sure.
go
I'll
ahead.
finish up this slide and your charts next, okay?
All right.
And so what I wanted to say here, as you see on your screen, there can start to be at this waning semi-sextile sometimes a sense of emptiness, all right? Because again, been there, done that, been there, done that. It doesn't make any sense for me anymore. I'm tired of this. I'm feeling this spark of the new. I want to move forward. And so it was kind of the words that I had said before. It's kind of like 1 step forward, 1 step back. You've got to have a foot in the past and a foot in the future. And you've got to go back and forth between the two as the intuitiveness of your soul sparks. And that's how you keep the soul steady. That's how you keep the soul balanced. That's how you keep yourself somewhat fulfilled, so that you're not just getting completely lost in the void of emptiness, and you're not completely frustrated because you can't just break free and bust forward as the new starts to spark and you want to follow through with it. Okay, so our volunteer has a Mars-Pluto angle at 334 degrees, 23 minutes. If you cannot read this, the birth data is July 29th, 76, 7:25 a.m., Greenville, South Carolina. This volunteer prefers the Placidus houses. And so quickly transitioning, he feels, he feels he, goes both ways, individuated, spirituated. 2 parents, older brother, younger sister, very strong evangelical Christian upbringing. There was both physical and emotional abuse, lower middle class. Within the family, the whole sexuality archetype, suppressed, hidden, shamed. He had one long-term relationship, gay. It ended this year. Occupation, he's a nurse, he's an astrologer, a healer, a homeopathy practitioner. And back in '08, he had a very strong shamanic initiation from the spiritual emergency. So let me just quickly point out here. Hold on a second. I think I will find it. This one. There it is. We have a third house Pluto and the Pluto in Libra generation, that relationship orientation with the polarity, Aries lessons, independent, who am I? If we start at Pluto, you one more time, you go counterclockwise around that circle to get to Mars here at about 14 Virgo in the second house. Ruler per Pluto by sign is Venus. By house, a Gemini soul is Mercury. You see Mercury new phase Venus here in mid Leo, just inside this 15-degree Leo ascendant. Let's quickly point out that we have the South Node in Taurus 9 with North Node here, Scorpio. Third, Pluto and Mercury rule the North Node. Venus and Jupiter rule the South Node. You see we have, in my language, Sun, Balsamic, Saturn. Square the nodes. If you start at 6 Leo, the nodes are separating squares, going clockwise, reversing. So in addition, though, to having the Sun, Balsamic, Saturn square these nodes, which, by the way, means the North Node is involved in the past life patterning as much as the South Node, and the North Node is a Balsamic conjunction to Uranus. But in addition to that, I want to point out that the Sun, Saturn, they are both in waning sextiles to Pluto, and they are both in waning trines to Neptune. So we have the planetary skip steps with the squares to the nodes, but that is mitigated by sextiles and trines to both Neptune and Pluto. Now, I can start rattling off with interpretations. However, what I'd like to do, volunteer, is I'd like to hear from you first of all, as we've been going through the slides up to this point. What's been sparking for you as you look at your own chart?
Yeah, so lots of stuff resonating with what you're saying. I there has definitely been a strong sense of like um, my voice in this lifetime, third house, um, like having things to communicate, having downloads, having revelation, and being in a place of like, not yet, nope, you know, so kind of like just really like having to surrender, like kind of this feeling that my destiny is really out of my hands.
Mhm.
You know, and a lot of people don't understand that when I talk about it. But that has been the feeling most of my life, that I have something to contribute from my voice, but uh, but I am in this kind of place of waiting almost. Um,
Mm.
and and also, you know, definitely did not. Uh, I felt like a, you know, stranger, you know, stranger born in a strange land, right? Um, kind of feeling. And I mean, I think a lot of us maybe have felt that, but it was definitely strong for me, and still feeling like ties to that world. Like I haven't been able to. It's like I couldn't leave it fully, but also being very strange in the pursuits that I've had and just the way that I have been in my life. Um, so kind of fitting in, kind of not fitting in, you know, just being in this on the edge, on the borderlands. And I would say the void aspect of things and the emptiness, sometimes feeling lost, has been definitely a strong theme in this life. and has contributed, I think, to spiritual um, realization, and it's been an edge that I keep like leaning into and surrendering into, and just kind of um, happen to keep saying yes to what life, what spirit, what universe brings to me. Um, Not always having a clear sense of where I'm going, which is that kind of balsamic darkness phase too. Uh, Having desires, but like, um, but not really being able to manifest a lot of them all the time. Like sometimes I can, but it's not. It's like I said, it feels like it's out of my hands.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's several things in the chart that are suggesting shifts from ego to soul. Okay. Um,
Hmm.
I took a few notes, so let's work with a few things one on one. Okay. And blend them all together in regards to that. You know, you have Pluto and the polarity point from third to ninth. You have south node to north node from ninth to third. To have soul and ego so much in this polarity, it's going to bring up all kinds of language and communication issues. And it will also bring up the whole cultural, spiritual paradigm as well. You saying stranger in a strange land. We can sometimes think of that with a ninth house Pluto, but that's also its polarity third. That belongs to both sides of that polarity many times, because a third house Pluto, and you know, your Pluto's kind of early degrees in that third house, so it's coming off of kind of somewhat what we would say second, if we want to just use that whole movement for interpretation.
Hmm.
And so that early third house Pluto soul, there's a certain amount of curiosity, there's a certain amount of exploration that is being done. That's the nature of a third house Pluto, to be curious. And relative to
Hmm.
these nodes, and they move backwards, okay, so they're just coming into the third and the ninth houses as well. I, I'm kind of sparking with the hit that it may have been a few lifetimes before since you've had your karmic complex in the third ninth, because if we start to bring in Saturn square the nodes and the skip steps with maturation, self-responsibility, authority, we bring in the sun, which is life force and creativity, and we put them balsamic. One of the things that um, um, Jeffrey Green and Stephen Forrest of a Jupiter Saturn cycle ago, and I had just looked this up for something a couple of days ago. They did a workshop together, and that workshop turned into two books called Measuring the Night, volumes 1 and
Hmm.
2. And there was a volunteer chart in there, and that volunteer had like 6 planets in Leo with a Leo ascendant, and some in the 12th, some in the first. And I remember Jeffrey saying, when you see a bunch of strong planetary Leo energy in the 12th house, that is a push-pull between ego and soul.
Hmm.
And that those Leo planets are trying to almost slow down that process of feeling like you're being sucked into the black hole. The black hole is source, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, that whole surrender process. So that's adding energy into this third house Pluto with the Mars in that balsamic semi-sextile to it. So carrying on from this, what I'm sensing here with these planets square the nodes is there is a karmic history of being the leader and being the spiritual leader before. But for whatever reasons, it didn't go all that well. So the trauma of getting your tongue cut out, the trauma of getting
Hmm.
crucified, the Inquisition, the trauma of, getting the head cut off, the two rulers of the South Node here.
Hmm.
So there is that, and I'm just, as I'm fond of saying, I'm just an opinion picking up on intuitive hits, may or may not be yours, reality wise, but you can see with these two planets square the nodes that there is a trauma of the past with the voice, with communications,
Yeah.
with being, able to speak. All right. And yet, these two
Yeah.
rulers of the South Node are new phase, just inside the ascendant. And this Mercury has rulership specifically of your soul, and it has co rulership of your conscious desire nature with Mars. And I would say to you, and I sense that this is relative to the whole conscious awareness of your soul, that sometimes for you it may be less what your third house Pluto in Libra rattles off and more of what you are clarifying within your own mind, within your own
Hmm.
soul. So, in other words, you don't have to be out here as you were in the past, screaming it from the rooftops. Listen to me, follow me, look at me. You are sparking, okay, and recognizing that what is really important, what really becomes universal, is your own deep inner communion with Source. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, work with that clarity, um, this is what I know, this is what I sense. I'm fond of saying through Neptune's transit in its own sign Pisces, I'm saying the Neptune and Pisces, there's two mantras and they're both questions. What would you have me know, Source? And just
Hmm.
asking that universally and asking it Source answers. And so with your Mars Pluto balsamic phase, we could adopt that. And then my second Neptune Pisces mantra is, what would you have me do, Source? And so as you are clarifying that deep inner communion with Source, one on one yourself, you know, coming off of your evangelical upbringing, no need for a book, no need for a building, no need for an intermediary. It's direct one on one. And as that clarifies
Hmm.
for you, okay, then when it is there to speak, you will find that courage to speak up, no matter how unsettling it may seem at the time. Third house. And then, in addition to that, as that clarity of really inner communing with Source comes through, then Mars will get clarity on exactly what it is to do, Virgo, as well. What is there for you in, you know, building that deep inner security that sometimes can elude third house Plutos. Um, We were joking, and I don't know if you heard this on the pre-call or before we started the recording. I don't always know whenever Leroy unmutes, but we were getting the call ready, and I let Leroy know that volunteer was male, and I said, oh, by the way, oh, we're talking about something. I said, oh, we have a third house Pluto. So that was the joke, because I am married to a third house Pluto, but he's Pluto Leo generation. And one of the things that Leroy has always said, being him and a different chart, but he has Sun in Leo and it's in the third house. One of his little phrases that, well, I was so busy running, I ran into the back of myself. And that is a third house energy. This, that, this, that, this, that. The curiosity of the zodiac. And
Mm-hmm.
your curiosity is to be able to communicate, to be able to express, to be able to write. But sometimes the third house Plutos are not always integrating. And that's the ninth house polarity. To go over to that right brain and be able to put it all together. Okay. And for you, it's to go over
Right.
to the ninth house Aries and put it together for yourself. And that calm energy of the third house. And then again, it allows you to discover the insights of what is yet for you to fulfill in the third house nature. Obviously, it will be communications, all right? But it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
more than communications. Remember, the mutable quadrant, third, sixth, ninth, 12th, which is strong within your karmic complex. It is the healing quadrant of the zodiac. And it may be that it's for you to speak through your work as much as your voice. And that's Mars in Virgo second, the work, okay? Being able, the work, and I say that broadly because you seem to be in traditional and non-traditional work, as many third house straddling both, Mars, Balsamic, Pluto straddling both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But pointing out, take the pressure off whether or not you're the gifted speaker or your book gets published, and just say, my work on the planet, everything I do is my voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, there's a lot of nonverbal communications going on the planet all the time. Just look at body language, which is third house, Gemini, Virgo. So, is that making sense?
Yep. All of it really resonates and makes complete sense to me. Yep. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Questions,
even
questions.
I've had many recollections of lifetimes where I was killed or persecuted because of something that I spoke or shared, or
Mm-hmm.
so there's that martyr kind of leader martyr archetype that has definitely shown up in my karmic history from what I've been able to recollect, and obviously shows up in my chart. Um, and feeling like I'm in this place of, I don't know, letting go of, like, there's almost like a way in which, yeah, I mean, it's um hmm, the need to be right, the need to be
Mm-hmm.
whatever, to have the message or whatever it is, the
Yes.
revelation, I don't know, and
Yes.
thus setting up this kind of martyr um, this martyr and masochistic kind of cycle
Yes.
into a lot more of a place of surrender and allowing, and more of a yin quality, which is what this phase is about, of like being able
Yes.
to sense when it is there space for me to communicate here, is there not, and like really being okay with that. And I feel like as I've grown in years, I feel more of a settling into like, okay, and it's true, like when it's correct for me to communicate, it's like the energy shows up and the courage shows up, and it's like effortless. But if I try to push in any way, like, and meet resistance, it's that I do meet resistance, and it's a really good sign for me, like, okay, this is not the right place, not the right time. You got to trust. So that's kind of what I want to reflect back.
Mm,
Um,
totally. Hmm.
yeah, and I think the Chiron in the ninth house probably contributes to that feeling of stranger in a strange land, maybe, as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
Um, uh, yeah, I don't know that I don't know
It's
what
and
question to ask really,
that, that's
but
fine.
I'm open to hearing what might have been sparked by what I shared.
Well, in balsamic phase, we cut right to the chase here. Um, I will. I have two things that spark as I'm listening to you, and I had thought of this had sparked before, but it came back again, and it's reminding me. I don't know if you are familiar that Jeffrey Green is a ninth house Pluto in Leo, and Saturn's in Leo, balsamic that ninth house, and I remember in Jeffrey's early teachings, and don't ask me where, but I remember him relaying a lifetime one time where he was like the town crier over in medieval Europe, and the sky is falling, and he's out on the streets, trying to tell people, what's coming, and he was correct, but nobody wanted to hear it, and somebody came along and just filleted him. Said, I don't know whether
Mm-mm.
they cut off his head or cut out his tongue, or I mean, he was gone. That lifetime was over. But that's what I see with this Sun Saturn, square these nodes here. The ability to tap into the vision or the message or the truth and awareness, but consensus doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So you could have some of that type of
Mm-mm.
energy, but you could also have had that energy and what was tied up in this and in Jeffrey's past life situation as well, that Leonian energy that was just trying to force itself out there onto the world and going, okay, well, it didn't quite work to do it that way. And then it causes us to have to go within and have, that deep reflection of when to speak and when not to speak, what to say, what not to
Totally.
say, how
Yep.
to say it. And so you've got all of that going on because again, this is, pretty active here with the T squares of planets, and I include Chiron in with planets, in addition to
Mm-hmm.
the whole skip steps. And if you want to take these as, to the south node as the resolution node with the south node. Oh, I had that wrong here. This is north node, balsamic Uranus. I think I said it the opposite. South node is balsamic Chiron. I left brain have to correct myself. If you look at this as the resolution node and Chiron comes into this picture for these skip steps, okay, there's a quieting and a simplification that's going on. And this Taurus to the ninth house, there's an energy of that, again, inner knowing Taurus.
Hmm.
knowing what you know, ninth house. And it allows you to quiet down, and it allows you to have, one more time, your own communion with Source that nobody can take away from you under any circumstance. But it allows you to have a quieting down and not have to try to be so involved, third ninth, or so in charge, Leo, of how consensus is activated or um, perceiving or working with everything else. So,
Hmm.
and that, as you work with these two planets resolving themselves through working through the past and coming to that inner peace of knowing, this is activating your Pluto polarity point, and it is again calming down the restless energy that allows you to pace yourself through your work, traditional and non-traditional, however it is best to do. And then this eventually then sparks deep, deep psychological awareness of yourself.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah,
yes,
it's good.
if we look at that stranger in the strange land, if we want to, I still don't have Leroy yet. We had hail damage, and so of course here they are showing up. We never know when they drive in the driveway. So let's take a little bit of time here if we can, and if you don't mind, if you're comfortable, let's work with the whole gender, okay? Um, situation for you, okay? If I may, a couple of comments. First of all, for everybody, in Jeffrey Green's Pluto Volume 1, he spoke a lot about the Cancer, Capricorn, and the fourth, 10th, and the squares from first, seventh, Aries, Libra get brought in. He spoke a lot that when you see Pluto there, when you see the nodes there by signs and houses in those cardinal quadrants, especially Cancer, Capricorn, 4th, 10th, that there's a strong possibility of gender switching. And he also talks about, and over the decades, I have come to see this as, in terms of consensus individuating, spirituating as well. And he talks about how for many of our souls we get comfortable in one gender and we exhaust evolutionary lessons to a certain extent until we switch over to another gender. And when we do that, his story was, I think, the pair of blue jeans. The first time you buy a new pair of blue jeans, they're very uncomfortable, and you've got to wash and wear and wash and wear, and eventually they become so comfortable that they're threadborne. Finally, you got to throw them away. Well, that's that whole gender moving back and forth thing. And as we are evolving through or expanding in conscious awareness, we are able to go back and forth lifetime to lifetime with genders. And I remember asking him back when him and Noel Till in the early 2000s did their 3 conferences together. I remember asking him with a group of students one time, so what is the purpose of homosexuality? And he says, well, it's to learn to love the soul first and the body second. And then is learning to be androgynous. Your evolved souls become androgynous. They are able to go back and forth and back and forth. So that's some of the generic background of some of Jeffrey Green's teachings. However, as we have moved through this transit of Pluto in Capricorn, it has brought all of these gender issues to the table again. And as we have been observing with many astrologers, and I think it's just a broader picture of evolution in human consciousness in this space and time, regardless of culture, because we've had so much patriarchal distortion and suppression. I think that we are seeing the whole LBGTQ. I'm not very good going beyond that. It's becoming more and more a function of the entire zodiac and 12 archetypes, and less that you can pinpoint it to this sign or this house or this planet. So, and as I've worked with clients, and I started attracting um, gay clients, male and female, long time ago. I just didn't have judgments around it, and word of mouth. So I've just had those types of clients for 2, 3 decades. And so as I have, been exploring through all of that awareness and sharing that basic androgyny, soul first, body second, and then being able to become more and more aware and able to go back and forth and back and forth. And when we're male, we can find our inner female. When we're female, we can find our inner male, and we express inner and outer, however we need to do that. And so I, again, one more time, am less and less putting it towards any specific archetype. When I see that cardinal quadrant with Pluto and the nodes, I see it being, oh, last time, blah, 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 we switched. How easy is that for you? But I don't negate it, or I don't limit it to any of the 12 archetypes. Now, having laid that base, when I come across that Gemini in third house and that whole curiosity that exists with the mutable, they go exploring, and they don't even want to be labeled. And I also find this true of the Pluto and Libra generation. I'm what do they call it, pan or something?
Hmm.
Don't as my third house Pluto husband says, if you label me, you negate me. And so I'm like, not putting any labels on there. So I will see the third house Pluto curiosity with that. So I'm just putting that down as basis of foundation, not saying one thing yay or nay for you, third house Pluto in Libra. And with that Mars balsamic there. With everything that I've said, I guess I'd like a little bit of feedback, anything sparking for you, what you how did you realize where you were at, and let's explore it together with your chart.
Okay. So, I noticed that I was attracted to men from a very young age, like less than 5 years old, you know. And I grew up in a culture. I was born on a Christian university campus, and my dad was very homophobic. The culture was very homophobic, and um, it was definitely a source of self-hatred for me growing up, because it was something that I wanted to shake, that I didn't want to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yep. And so for me, I feel, it's very much wrapped up in that nodal axis too, the Taurus
Mm-hmm.
to Scorpio,
Mm-hmm.
and embracing the Uranus Scorpio energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like, being gay has been such a gift to me, because uh, it's really allowed me to tap into the well of pain that I think I had, um, maybe plastered over on the soul level. Um, so, um, yeah, there's been a lot of grief that has come up in this life for me, a lot of grieving, and not always very attached to circumstances, but just tears. And I often relate Saturn to grief, but um, I anyway, I feel like that struggle for me was the suffering that it created was really a gift to help me kind of come into more of a sense of wholeness and um, comfort with myself. But it was the struggle, the religious voice that I grew up with
Mm-hmm.
um, was hard. It was like I was 25 when I finally came out, and um, right before then, I'd already become a nurse. I was feeling drawn into the ministry, which later really turned into like soul ministry. But so I had gone to a moved to Kansas City, joined a ministry school, dropped out pretty quickly, and then I started having this vision of myself following this rope that I couldn't even see into pitch black darkness. And it scared me. It scared me to death that I knew I was going into something that I didn't know where I was going. And I had a feeling it had to do with my sexuality, and I was scared to even, address it. Um, and so I left the church, I left Kansas City, started travel nursing, and pretty quickly had this like really crazy encounter with astrology that blew my paradigms open. And one day in my apartment, I hear the voice of spirit say, "If you don't accept your sexuality, you're not going to grow any further spiritually." I'm like, "Oh,
Mm.
okay," because that was the most important relationship to me was spirit. And so having that green light was huge. And so it was around 25 that I came out and had this huge weight lifted off of me. And then over years, it took me. So I was 25. I didn't have my first relationship until I was like 39. Um, but yeah, I don't, that's what I'm feeling to say at this moment. But I don't know. Yeah, curious what that sparks for you.
When you came out, did you come out with your parents? And where are they alive today? Are they accepting?
hmm Um, I came out to my mom. I flew my mom to Arizona and came out to her in Sedona. Um, and the first thing that she said, my dad told me growing up repeatedly, if I ever find out you're gay, I'll kill you.
Oh,
And that
jeez.
was that was the so he thought that he could scare it out of me, and it just drove the self-hatred in more. Um, so I came out to her away from her home, and she said,
Mhm.
no matter what, I love you, but don't tell your dad. and and that lasted for about a year. Um, and I was in Hawaii nursing, and I came out to my father by a letter and got this like 8-page type sermon back from him about how I was an abomination, and you know, and I got a sermon sent to me on audio tape that Christmas, and yeah, it was hard. It was laughable on one level, and it was really painful.
Oh, of
Um,
course.
and by the time he died in 2000, so I came out in 2004, I think, and he died in 2012. But we had really healed a lot of our, there'd been a bridge built between us, and he kind of realized that I was still his son. Like I was still like, you know, I might have different sexual needs or sexual attraction than him, but he told me several times before he died that he respected me,
Mm.
which was huge to hear that from him.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and my mom, I think, I feel like my siblings, third house, are, especially my sister, is the most, at this point in my life, the most averse to my sexual orientation. Um,
Mm.
she wouldn't let my boyfriend in the house. They live together, my brother, sister, mom. Um, but my mom, I feel she's pretty open. Like I think she would still prefer for me not to be gay, but it doesn't feel like it's a big issue for her at this point. So I do
Mm,
feel like there's been some healing. Like I wasn't completely cut out. There were times where I spent months not really in communication with them, but um, yeah.
mhm. Scorpio on the fourth house cusp, the early environment, you know,
Hmm.
the North Node, Balsamic, Uranus, and them leaving the fourth, coming into the third here, you know,
Hmm.
lifetimes of being judged by parents. I mean, this is a very
Hmm.
tight, you know, 828, fourth house cusp, 8-2 nodes, same thing up here. So, you know, we're really in that transitioning right there. And so that early environment that again felt like it was crucifixion, and especially with father figure, authoritarian father figure, traditional, you know, square this node and not having anybody or any ability to understand who you were. Talk about a stranger in a strange land. It's that classic feeling like, what the fluff am I doing in this family?
Hmm. Hmm.
But so much of it
Yeah.
was it was the shock to wake you up to be who you are. This is who I
Hmm.
am and this is who I'm not. Pluto Libra, reiterated by the third. And, you know, and so that Mars here in the second, it varies, and even the south node. Sometimes this energy creates a strong sexual drive, but sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it can be somewhat suppressed. And I would say growing up in the environment that you did and having the insights as young as you did in regards to your attraction orientation, it just served to further the guilt and the suppression of who you naturally are and who
Hmm.
you
And one thing I didn't,
naturally. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
sorry, one thing I didn't mention was, this, there was definitely a strong sex drive when I was younger. Like, I think I had my
Okay.
first sexual experience when I was 11 with a
Mm-hmm.
neighbor
Mm-hmm.
and or a cousin. And from 11 to 17, I was very sexually active with two neighbors and a cousin. And my dad found
Mm-hmm.
out right before my senior year of high school, and the shaming, the trauma of the shame that was heaped on me at that time was pretty intense.
Yeah.
And
Were
so
were
that kind of
were
drove the
these
sexuality.
sure. If I may, were these gay or heterosexual?
They were gay. Yeah.
Okay.
I've
Oh,
never had.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 So
So it
if
was
we
like a
then look,
split. It was a split in my psyche, right? And it was,
oh yeah.
um, you know, like I had this one identity that was very sexually open and able to have these experiences. Of course, they were very hidden. Um, and then this other part of me that was so ashamed and guilt ridden and, mea culpa, mea culpa. Like,
Yep.
so
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. Oh, totally. Totally. Yeah. What I wanted to say here then was bringing this relative to, you know, Mars Pluto, which included in the desire nature is the sexual desire. And EA has always said the last desire to be exhausted is the sexual. And Jeffrey Green would
Mm,
say that, you know, real only 1 to 2% of the people on the planet are naturally celibate. And of course, those are going to be the Yogananda types that have naturally exhausted the sexual desire, the ultimate been there, done that. And I'm not
mhm,
saying
mhm,
you know, this is where you're at. No, you're not there yet. But I'm saying relative to Mars in this balsamic 330, you know, 335 um, to Pluto. what is there for you in resolving your desire nature is understanding the sexual desire from a universal, timeless, natural perspective. And it goes back
Mhm.
to the comment we had made earlier. All souls will go through heterosexual, homosexual, out of the whole curiosity thing. And again, moving us towards androgyny, but before that, moving us to love a soul first and a body second.
Mhm. Mhm.
And especially from the perspective, the other thing that I didn't bring into this picture, then also from that perspective of reincarnation. So sometimes we're not just yearning for the same sex because that's what we were comfortable with when we were the other gender for so long, okay? And we don't know how to work with that new gender yet. But it can also be that sometimes when you have that same sex deep attraction between two people, they may have easily been heterosexual lovers in a past life, and they just
Mhm.
recognize that deep soul connection with each other. So that third house nature of your soul is is on a left brain, right brain, mental level, looking at it from all these many perspectives. And then, making sense of it all, and then intuiting how your own soul fits into that larger picture of it, and being able to go, this is who I am, this is who I'm not, this is where I'm attracted, this is where I'm not, this is how it works for me sexually, this is how it doesn't. And excuse me, making that inner peace with that, where it naturally works
Mhm.
with you. Going back to this, not only were you born into the family of origin where this was an extreme judgmental thing, I would say you probably have the soul consciousness to be aware that perhaps you were the one judgmental in the past.
Oh
And
yeah.
here's the third house doing the shoe
Mhm.
on the other foot.
Mhm. Yep, and the
And now,
misuse of sexual energy. Yeah.
yeah, yep, that
Mhm.
involved in it too. And so here we are. Okay, let's, let's try on every type of sexual shoe we can. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing now physically, but that may be part of the soul, your own soul's energy in helping your soul understand sexuality from deep spiritual tantric perspectives.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And
Hmm.
also the aspect of it forging a greater inner strength and a greater differentiation, individuation journey for my soul. I think that's just as big of a part of it as is the sexual curiosity and you know the
Hmm.
tantric aspect and all of that. You know what I mean?
Yep, totally. Yep. Hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you, Kimberly.
Hmm. You bet. If there's any questions or
That was
comments
beautiful.
from the,
Thanks for the gift.
oh, you are so most welcome. Thank you for participating. And Leroy, I think, is back on the board. So if there's any questions or comments from anybody, you're welcome to type them into the board or raise your hand. I'm going to carry on. We've got just a few more slides before we finish up with class. And so I'll move on and tell her unless Leroy interrupts me.
Kim,
Yes?
this might be a relevant question here, and
Mhm.
forgive me, I had to kind of go outside for a half hour here, but, so I've missed a few questions, but the most recent one has to do with the midpoint between Mars and Uranus. The question is, um, isn't Pluto the midpoint between Mars and Uranus too? So is that relevant to bring into exploration with how sexuality actually manifests in this life? Is that clear?
I understand the question. Uranus is being pulled into the midpoint. The midpoint is going to be closer between the North Node and Mars, okay, being able to pull them in. In a nutshell, if you just look at, the fact that we're dealing with two relationship signs, one sexuality, Scorpio and Libra, and you put the Mars in here into the second house, in a nutshell, all this is explaining, the lifetimes of sexual judgments by the soul and upon being put upon the soul, both directions, and in effect, even relative to this third house Pluto, which can be judgments as well, creating that confusion. And so this comes back then to with Mars being the balsamic semi-sextile here, being able to understand balsamic phase, being able to fulfill whatever is there for remaining desires within the soul. We discussed it all from the perspective of voice and communications and ideas, but then also then understanding this from the homosexuality perspective of the soul making inner peace with itself and not judging, being able to understand sexuality from a big broad perspective of universal truth, judge less, discern more, allow for the multi faceted experiences of sexuality on that whole journey of exhausting the last separating desire. And then allowing the soul to just be able to, this is who I am, and this is what I desire, and this is what I wish to experience, and having the freedom to do it. So yes, as we look at the woundedness from here and the judgment from here and all the words we spoke about, they can all become very strongly filtered through the soul, and the soul learning to make sense of it all, accept what works for it, Libra, and release what doesn't on its journey to know more. Nice question. All right, I'm going to move on. Leroy, interrupt me if we need to. And so sometimes I look for how that little mouse works. As we move into the last aspect, we get to the conjunction. And this is where we are less than 360 degrees, 355, 56, moving along. And so as we enter into these last few degrees between Mars and Pluto, this is where we bring an entire cycle of our desired nature to completion and closure. And this is where the whole transitioning of our focus goes from egocentric consciousness to universal consciousness. This is where ego is surrendering to soul, and soul is surrendering to universal soul relative to, we're speaking specifically the desire nature of Pluto by sign and specifically by house. And what it means is, we won't ever experience the desires exactly like this again. Out of curiosity, if we're looking, and I'm speaking generic here, I'm not speaking specifically to our volunteer chart. If we are looking at Mars, Balsamic, Pluto by conjunction from consensus, could they many lifetimes from now come back and have a Mars Balsamic conjunction Pluto in that house, individuated or spirituated? We don't know. possibly. But relative to the consciousness of the soul, when Mars is balsamic conjunct aspect Pluto in that house, been there, done that. They're getting it. And, you know, there are certain things that you can recognize in your life that once you get it, you really don't have to do that one again. And so that will be there. That will be true. Now, the closer we get to that balsamic conjunction, there is a new cycle that is really sparking. The closer you get to 360, the stronger it's sparking. And Jeffrey always used to say that that balsamic conjunction between any two planets can be one of the most frustrating aspects there is, because you got a foot in the past and you got a foot in the future. So you've got to cooperate, okay, through, all right, any sense of frustration with what you feel obligated to finish. And here we're going to speak specifically to whatever those Pluto desires are. And so if there are any remaining lessons, if there's any karma with people, if there's any karma left with situations, using a phrase from our volunteer chart, if there's any remaining sexual situations, Mars, Pluto, balsamic, that must be resolved. Those people, those situations, those circumstances relative to that Pluto house, they're going to show up and they're going to be there, and it's going to be very deja vu. And the best thing we can do is, again, I will, my will, divine will. What is it I'm to do here, Source? What is it I'm to resolve? What is it I must finish up? And the more willingly, okay, that we will walk through that, the more that we lessen the sense of frustration, the more that we get a moment or two of actually being able to jump forward before we come back and fulfill. And so when we look at this relative to Mars and Pluto, which is the soul itself, and Mars is a balsamic conjunction aspect, relative to that Pluto house and current life, Pluto sign, we really become a vehicle for Source to be sensed and for us to really divine will and act upon Source, with Source. We are fulfilling our own journey. At the same time, then, we can be channeling and experiencing it with Source. And as we co-create, then it's quite possible to be that messenger, to be the teacher, to be the one who sparks relative to others. If we're not wanting to co-create with Source, then this balsamic conjunction will break down into all of those classic Piscean words: confusion, disassociation, alienation, disillusionment, etc., etc., etc. When that happens, that we get into, you know, the disillusionment, etc., it can, in some cases, be where our soul thinks that it can play God in some way. And so instead of co-creating, what would you have me do, Source? And I will, my will, divine will, we can think, oh, I am Source now. Hey, I got it. And if that's the case, we'll have that ultimate fall. We'll have the confusion. We'll have that, deja vu of being stuck and to being forced into aligning my will with divine will. And so it teaches us that we're not source, we're the channel for source to come through. And as a side point, then it also teaches us that any remaining projections of our desires through another person, through another experience or situation, that's not the ultimate meaning. That's not the ultimate expression of the desire. So relative to Mars and Pluto, you can see how specific it becomes for that Pluto house. I will, my will, divine will. How do I co-create with you, source? You can extrapolate this into any two planets. I guess as we finish up this, I wanted to put the screen up for the dates that all these managed to come through in the midst of all of the familial passings that Leroy and I have had, and even there's just the start, stop for me in regards to work this year. I was supposed to go up to Canada this year and teach a 2-day workshop on the cycle of phases and aspects generically. And of course, they closed travel between the border. And so we turned it online into a series. And so I told you earlier, I discovered the cycle of phases and aspects early on, and it just clicked for me with regards to chart interpretation. And I love being an advocate for it. And so my latest edition of looking at the cycle of phases and aspects generically is, again, this series we did, and we're calling it, oh gosh, my brain it's been fractured with my loss. Understanding chart interpretation, right? I did that. Mastering. That's the word.
Mastering phases and aspects is what we're calling. We have a mastering series for advanced associates, working their way through segment 1, segment 2, and so we have two in the mastering series. The first one, of course, was our Florida adventure, where we did mastering chart interpretation, which covers a lot of cycle of phases and aspects work, through all the, I think we had 8 or 12 charts that you read down there in Fort Lauderdale. Yeah. But this is the mastering phases and aspects, which is a more definitive and an interesting way to process some of the Manitoba Astrological Association group members up there and their charts using the cycle of phases and aspects.
Yeah, we did different charts. We did different planetary pairs. And my Pluto Virgo was happy with it, which is a lot for Pluto Virgo. To say for itself. Point is, I don't know if it's up yet. It's going to be offered publicly. And if not, we're real close to getting it up and out for everybody. So you can look for that if this is something that is of interest for you in pursuing on your studies.
Yeah, and then it is, the product's been created and all the videos are loaded into that product. I haven't put it up on any particular page yet because I'm redesigning a couple of pages of the Learning Pass page, as well as, this type of more advanced material. And so before the end of the year, it'll certainly be available, and we'll try to get an email out to particularly segment 1, segment 2 students on it, and as well as the general EAN list.
Thank you, Media Monk. I appreciate that. All right, everybody. Thank you. I wish you all solstice blessings. And as we have combined in that segment too, I am going to do a short little series of classes on health and wellness. It's been a while since I've done some of those classes. So if you purchase segment 2, you'll be a part of receiving the information when I go forward, assuming my life smooths out in January, February, with just things that have sparked for me in regards to evolutionary astrology and health and wellness. All right, again, solstice blessings, everyone, and I wish you a beautiful, beautiful new year ahead. See you in January.